Hey guys, tonight we step into firelight, not the cozy kind that flickers on hearthstones and warms toes, but the kind that devours parchment, shudders up marble columns, and licks the bones of forgotten gods. You are in a stone corridor, long and breathless, where every footstep sounds like a challenge. A door has slammed behind you. A torch flares too close to the scrolls stacked in the alcove. You can smell old ink and something burning, not yet fire, but something about to become fire. Outside, someone is yelling. Inside, something is being erased. And once it's gone, it might never return. If this kind of sleepy storytelling is your thing, hit like and subscribe. It's free and you can always unsubscribe if you change your mind. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments and let me know how you're doing tonight. Now, close your eyes. You're walking into history's most mysterious library, and tonight it might burn. You don't remember when the footsteps started. They could be yours. They could be someone else's. But they echo in rhythm with your heartbeat as you slip deeper through the halls of Alexandria's great library. The air is thick with dust and possibility. Somewhere nearby a cart rumbles, scrolls piled high, bound with strips of rawhide and papyrus tags that flutter like nervous leaves. Scribes shout, then whisper, then vanish. Something is off. And then it happens. A voice, urgent, desperate, shouts in Latin. A clatter of metal boots. A crash. The unmistakable sound of oil sloshing where it shouldn't slosh. Then fire. You can smell it before you see it. Olive oil, pitch, melting wax. The first shelves don't scream, but something in you does. The Library of Alexandria is on fire, and history, forever, will forget the moment it truly began. But what's truly strange isn't the fire. It's that we don't really know when this moment occurred. Julius Caesar is blamed by some. Around 48 BCE, during his civil war with Pompey, Caesar's fleet burned in the harbor. Historians say the flames leapt from the docks to the storage rooms near the library. Some say tens of thousands of scrolls were destroyed. Others say, no, that couldn't be the end. That was just the appetizer. The true destruction came much later, perhaps under Emperor Aurelian in the 270 CE, when Alexandria was turned to rubble in a military campaign. Or maybe in 391 CE under Theophilus, when Christian mobs wiped out the Serapeum and its scrolls. Or maybe 642 CE under Caliph Omar, when scholars claim that an Islamic general ordered the burning of books, saying, if they agree with the Quran, they are redundant. If they disagree, they are heresy. Historians still argue whether any of these stories are true. Some call them propaganda, some call them myth, some quietly suggest there were multiple libraries, layered like secrets beneath a city of secrets, and what burned each time was only a piece of something far greater. But you're not here for the footnotes. You're here to see it happen. You're here as a stone shelf cracks under heat and tumbles into the path. A scroll unravels mid-air, ink blistering into meaningless smudges as it curls in the smoke. You reach for it. Why, you don't know, but your hand stops just short. A scribe pushes past you, clutching two scrolls to his chest like children. You glimpse diagrams on one of them, a circle inside a circle, notes in a language you don't recognize. Then he's gone. So is the scroll. So is the room. It's spreading fast. By the time Caesar's men realize what they've done, if they were the ones to do it, it's too late. Fires don't wait for apologies, neither does time. Of course, the big question that no one ever quite answers, what was in those scrolls? You hear all kinds of guesses, mathematics we didn't rediscover until Newton, maps showing Antarctica before it was covered in ice, ancient plays, philosophies, formulas, lost languages, even the blueprint for a steam engine. Mainstream historians estimate the library held between 40,000 and 400,000 scrolls, an infuriatingly wide gap. Some claim that number is inflated, a romantic myth. Others suggest it's an underestimate. The truth? Lost in smoke. But one thing's clear, Alexandria was not your average public library. It was more like a combination of Google, Harvard, and Area 51, crammed into one marble building. And maybe that was the problem. Because it wasn't just knowledge, it was power, intellectual dominance, a way for rulers to monopolize truth. Imagine the only copy of a scientific theory, a philosophical argument, a medical technique, sitting right there on a flammable shelf. No backups, no PDFs, no cloud. Erase the scroll, erase the idea. In the chaos, you glimpse it. Someone, not a soldier, slipping a small scroll into a leather bag beneath their robes. He ducks through a side passage and vanishes. The scroll might survive, or it might not. That's the maddening thing about history. It's full of people like that, quiet figures who could have saved something precious, or simply taken it to sell. And we'll never know. Here's a fringe tidbit for your sleepy thoughts tonight. Some researchers believe the fire didn't just destroy words. They say it erased evidence of technologies we still haven't caught up to. Ancient flight, megalithic engineering, even knowledge of planetary orbits more precise than Renaissance astronomy. Fringe? Absolutely, but persistent, like smoke you can't quite wave away. There's a theory, whispered in late-night forums in poorly lit corners of academia, that the library was doomed not because of war, but because of what it contained, not by accident, but by design. The idea goes, somebody wanted that knowledge gone. Not the whole library, just certain parts. A scroll here, a room there. Disappear them quietly over decades, blame the flames later. It's a theory that gives the fire a face. And while you stand here, shoulder brushing soot-blackened stone, watching a scroll crackle into ash, it doesn't seem so impossible. What kind of world might we have today if the fire hadn't come? Would we be sailing the stars by now? Would we have avoided 1,000 years of intellectual dark? Or would we just find new ways to burn things? The heat fades, the flames move on. You hear footsteps in the hallway behind you, not soldiers, not scribes, just someone else, another witness, maybe another thief, maybe someone with questions, like you. The torch gutters. You walk forward, because this is just the beginning. The smoke trails behind you like memory, curling upward, clinging to your robes, brushing your cheek like a whisper from a time already gone. But as you round the corner and descend a wide, cracked staircase, the fire dims behind you, the chaos recedes, and now, for a moment, you can almost pretend you're stepping into Alexandria, as it once was. Whole, humming, impossibly alive. You pass beneath a stone arch carved with stars, lions, and open scrolls. The marble beneath your feet is warm from torches and footsteps in time. You are entering the dream of empire, and it smells like ink. You've heard of Alexandria before, of course. Everyone has. The name floats in our collective imagination like Atlantis, half myth, half memory. But what most people forget is that Alexandria wasn't born from ancient wisdom. It was a startup, a power play, a bold new city imagined by one man and executed by his general. It starts with Alexander the Great, yes, the one with the ego that could eat a continent. After conquering Egypt in 332 BCE, he chose a windy strip of coast between the Mediterranean and Lake Mareotis to build a shining new capital. No dusty Thebes, no wrinkled Memphis. He wanted something modern, global, Greek, but bigger. He barely had time to dream it before dying young, because that's what ancient overachievers did. But his successor, Ptolemy the First Soter, picked up the blueprint and ran with it. He built not just a city, but an idea, a cultural melting pot of Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, Jews, and thinkers from everywhere between India and Iberia, and at its heart, the library. This wasn't just a warehouse of books, it was a weapon. The dream? Collect every piece of written knowledge in the world. Literally, the Ptolemies sent envoys, scholars, and spies to every known kingdom. They demanded copies of ship logs, purchased rare scrolls, even confiscated texts from travelers' baggage at the port, copying them, shelving the originals, and returning the knockoffs. Imagine customs agents today seizing your Kindle and swapping it for a blank. It wasn't polite, it wasn't subtle, it was genius. The library became the nerve center of a sprawling knowledge empire. But to understand why it mattered, you have to imagine what it was up against. Picture this. Most people couldn't read. Books weren't books, they were scrolls. Copying one took weeks. Losing one could mean losing everything known about a subject. No backups, no send to cloud. Knowledge wasn't just power, it was perishable. And so Alexandria's shelves grew fat with secrets, mathematics from Babylonia, astronomy from India, medicinal texts from Egypt, Greek tragedies, Phoenician sea charts, philosophical debates scribbled in charcoal margins, erotic poetry, lunar calendars, ship designs, myth, magic, madness. Some of it was beautiful, some of it was deeply strange, and some of it, historians still argue, might have been too dangerous to preserve. There's a story, likely apocryphal but too juicy not to whisper, that somewhere in the library was a scroll on how to build a weapon that could harness sunlight and set ships aflame. A death ray, Archimedes style. Sound ridiculous? Maybe, maybe not. Modern engineers have recreated similar effects using polished bronze mirrors and geometry alone. But here's a thing you may not know. Alexandria's library wasn't just a library. It was part of a much bigger structure called the Mausion, the Temple of the Muses. Think of it as an ancient think tank. It had lecture halls, laboratories, botanical gardens, and resident scholars on a government stipend. Free housing, free food, unlimited scroll access. It was basically academic heaven, until of course it wasn't. That's the weird thing about utopias. They don't last, especially the smart ones. And the smarter they get, the more threatening they seem. It's easy to forget now in our glow screen world, but back then, knowledge was political, dangerous, subversive. A clever scroll could dethrone a king or undermine a religion. A precise map could reveal a hidden route past enemy shores. A philosophical argument could unravel a god. So, as Alexandria grew, rich in thought, rich in trade, it began to scare people. Not just rival kings, not just local priests, but its own rulers. Because sometimes when you build an empire on knowledge, the knowledge starts asking questions. And Alexandria was bold about it. They didn't just gather facts, they questioned them. They invited debate, heresy, hypothesis, the kind of stuff that makes powerful men sweat in their sandals. And here's a quirky tidbit you can take to dreamland. The library may have included scrolls describing the heliocentric theory that the Earth orbits the Sun over 1,000 years before Copernicus rediscovered it. Some even credit Aristarchus of Samos, whose work was reportedly housed in Alexandria. But those scrolls? Ash now, or missing, or stolen. The truth is, the more ambitious the library became, the more fragile it grew, like a brain with no skull. Each scroll a nerve, each scholar a synapse, and all it would take was one hammer strike to silence it forever. You reach the bottom of the staircase now, into a quieter hall. The fire hasn't reached here yet. The air is cool and smells of cedar and ash. There's a scribe asleep on his bench, a quill in one hand, a half-finished translation in another. You glance at the scroll. It's poetry. Something about a storm at sea. The word kaiklos, cycle, circle, appears over and over. It's beautiful, and no one will ever read it again. This is the tragedy of Alexandria. Not just what was lost, but what was almost remembered. And the truly terrifying thought? Maybe it wasn't lost. Maybe it was taken. Piece by piece, scroll by scroll, removed quietly over decades, squirreled away by secret keepers, rogue scholars, priests with motives. And the fire? Just the final sweep, the alibi, the perfect scapegoat for forgetting. You stare at the sleeping scribe. You wonder if he knew. You keep walking. The hallway narrows. Your sandals scrape against smoother stone now, older, worn down by 1,000 feet that came before yours, feet that carried philosophers, travelers, spies, and the odd, overconfident prince looking for forbidden knowledge. The air changes, cooler, still, and faintly, just faintly, you smell something strange. Not smoke this time. Metal, oil, and something that smells like hot brass gears. You glance sideways into a recessed chamber, dimly lit by an oil lamp with a cracked glass dome. And there it is, half buried beneath scrolls and cloth and dust, a bronze hand. The fingers are jointed, articulated like a machine. Welcome to the part of the library they didn't put on the tour. You're in the section where imagination, invention, and madness dance together in the dark. This is where the most unbelievable scrolls were kept, not because they were false, but because they were too far ahead of their time to be comfortable. Here, nestled among papyrus sheets and copper schematics, were blueprints for dreams that would take humanity 2,000 years to even begin to catch up with. The Great Library wasn't just a home for philosophy and literature, it was a laboratory of the future. Historians agree that Heron of Alexandria, who lived around the 1st century CE, worked in or near this very city. He designed machines powered by steam pressure, described in detail in texts like Pneumatica. These included automatic doors, vending machines, and even a crude steam turbine. That's right, 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution, Alexandria might have already cracked the idea of harnessing vapor to do work. Mainstream fact. Now add this. Heron also wrote about automatons, mechanical servants powered by hidden weights and pulleys, used in temples to dazzle worshippers, statues that moved, birds that sang, doors that opened with fire. That's real. That happened. So now imagine this. What else was in here? What other scrolls never survived the flames, or worse, never got copied before they vanished? Some fringe theorists speculate that the library stored ancient blueprints for even more radical devices, lenses capable of surgical precision, acoustic tools for levitating stone, yes, really, and long-forgotten diagrams for machines whose functions we still don't understand. One popular theory links Alexandria to the mysterious Antikythera mechanism, a complex gear-driven astronomical calculator discovered in a Roman shipwreck and often called the world's first analog computer. Could similar devices have been documented here, maybe even built here? You approach the table, dust coats the tools. Beside the bronze hand lies a rolled scroll, its end curling like a cat's tail. You gently open it. No words, just sketches. A bird-shaped machine with wind-powered wings, notes on pressure differentials, a name you can't quite decipher. Historians still argue whether these devices were ever built or just imagined, but the line between science and sorcery gets blurry fast when you're staring at gears drawn by a hand that lived before electricity was even a whisper. Here's a quirky detail. Some scrolls in Alexandria, according to fringe reports, may have detailed surgeries performed with precision instruments on the human brain, thousands of years before modern neurology. There are claims that certain Egyptian texts spoke of opening the skull to quiet the demons, suggesting early understanding of cranial pressure. Is that real? Maybe. Or maybe it was just metaphor, ancient poetry mistaken for medical advice. But it gets weirder. There's a persistent story, less history, more whispered bedtime heresy, that a handful of scrolls reference something eerily close to DNA. Not by name, of course, but through analogies, threads of life, twin spiral diagrams, descriptions of coded inheritance passed through seed blood. Are these just coincidences, poetic embellishments, or echoes of forgotten truths? You walk slowly now, careful not to disturb the powdered ash clinging to the air. You glance up and realize the ceiling is domed, covered in a mural, faded by smoke, but still there. A sky map, stars arranged in strange constellations, some familiar, some not. Another fringe claim that the library held not just the known constellations, but stars not officially discovered until centuries later. Sirius B Proxima Centauri, bodies too faint for ancient eyes. So how did they get there? Answer 1, artistic imagination. Answer 2, someone knew more than we thought. This is where Alexandria shifts from fact to folklore, from academia to goosebumps, and this is what makes it so dangerous, because the minute you start asking what if, the ground slips beneath your sandals. You're not in a library anymore, you're in a myth. But myths matter. Myths shape what we chase, what we fear. And myths, like fire, spread fast. You pause near a statue, half covered in a velvet cloth, tall, severe. A philosopher, a king, no nameplate, but someone's etched a word into the base. You squint. Mnimi. Memory. A bitter irony. Because this is the hall of what we forgot, or what was stolen from us. Ideas too bright to live in a world ruled by superstition and sword. It's tempting to believe it was all real, isn't it? That once upon a time, human beings nearly leapt forward, and were dragged back by fear, greed, and fire. That all the tools we needed for flight, medicine, mathematics, machines, were right here, and someone decided we weren't ready. Or worse, decided we shouldn't be. You take one more look around. Bronze hand, star map, scrolls that look suspiciously like schematics, and silence. Maybe it's just a trick of the flickering torch, but you could swear the statue's eyes are watching you, judging, waiting. Because the most frightening theory of all is that knowledge like this comes back, again and again, and each time we burn it down. Your sandals crunch over something soft. You look down, parchment, dozens of sheets, brittle and yellowed, scattered across the marble like autumn leaves, ink smudged by time, names half erased, equations you can't begin to understand. One scroll has a single phrase repeated down its margin. Ask, even if the answer ruins you. Well, you've just entered the part of the library they really didn't want you to see. The part they really wanted gone. This isn't just where knowledge lived. This is where it questioned everything. And in the center of this intellectual storm stood a woman with ink on her fingers, chalk in her hair, and no patience for fragile egos, Hypatia. You turn a corner into a chamber shaped like an amphitheater, semicircular, smooth stone, perfectly engineered for sound to carry. A single bench sits at the front, and you can almost see her there, robe swishing, stylus tapping, eyebrow raised like she's just heard something profoundly stupid and is about to dismantle it with elegance. Hypatia was born in the late 4th century CE, when Alexandria was no longer the crown jewel of the empire, but still shimmered with enough magic to matter. She was a mathematician, philosopher, astronomer, and maybe the last great mind to walk these halls before they fell silent. Mainstream historians agree she was brilliant. That's the safe part, the part they'll put in textbooks. But what they won't always dwell on is this: Hypatia was dangerous. Because she taught people, men mostly, to think for themselves, to challenge dogma, to trust logic. She spoke openly, refused to marry, rode through Alexandria in her own carriage, and held court with students from across the religious and political spectrum. That was revolutionary, and it made her a target. You place a hand on the cool stone bench. It's cracked, but still strong. There's a chalk diagram still faintly visible, arcs, circles, angles, possibly celestial, possibly rhetorical, possibly meaningless now that no one alive understands it, but someone once did. Hypatia wasn't a footnote, she was the moment, a living embodiment of the library's core principle, knowledge without compromise. But the world around her was changing fast. By the late 300s CE, Christianity had become the dominant force in Alexandria, not the soft poetic Christianity of parables and sandals, but the rising institution, consolidated, politicized, and increasingly militant. Pagan temples were defiled, old gods smashed, scrolls deemed unholy were burned or hidden. And Hypatia? Well, she taught pagan math, pagan philosophy, and worst of all, she didn't apologize for it. Historians still argue whether her murder in 415 CE was religiously motivated, politically strategic, or simply mob madness. But what they do agree on is this: she was dragged from her chariot by a Christian mob, stripped and killed with sharpened tiles or oyster shells. Because when ideas scare people, they don't debate them. They destroy the person who dares to speak them. You glance at a shattered oil lamp near the doorway. The soot trails up the wall like a shadow still reaching for something. There's a fringe theory, yes, fringe, but persistent, that Hypatia had access to some of the last remaining original scrolls from the library's earliest days. Not copies, not summaries, originals, including one, they say, which described a solar-based navigation system so precise it could rival modern GPS. Is it true? Who knows? The scroll, if it existed, died with her. Here's a weird one. A few ancient sources, possibly exaggerated, possibly mistranslated, hint that Hypatia may have dabbled in astral harmonics, an attempt to mathematically prove that celestial bodies emit frequencies that influence human behavior. Today, we call that astrology and roll our eyes. But Hypatia? She tried to give it math. You stand in the middle of the amphitheater and whisper, just to see if the stones remember her. Nothing, just echo. And yet, something lingers here. You get the sense that if you spoke the right phrase, at the right time of day, with the right cadence, something would answer back. This is what made the library terrifying. It wasn't just the information on the scrolls, it was what that information allowed. To question, to map, to rebel, to predict. And that's where Hypatia's real danger lived, not in what she knew, but in what she could teach others to see. Some say that before her death, she gave one of her most gifted students a bundle of scrolls and told him to run, to hide, to wait. Others say those scrolls were intercepted and destroyed, ritually, ceremonially, so no fragment remained. Still others believe the student didn't run far, that he buried them in the catacombs beneath the city, that they're still there, moldering beneath modern concrete, just waiting for the right tremor or water leak to bring them back to light. You turn your head, listen. For a moment, you swear you hear footsteps below. A scholar running, a scroll unrolling, the creak of wood against stone, then silence again. It's all part of the haunting paradox. Hypatia's death is one of the best recorded incidents from late Roman Alexandria, and one of the most debated. Her legacy is crystal clear and also deeply distorted. Was she a martyr for reason? A victim of religious extremism? A political pawn? Yes, and she was more. She was the last flicker of the old flame before the lights went out. You step back out into the corridor. The fire hasn't reached here yet, but the smoke is starting to drift in. Soft, curling fingers brushing the murals and whispering against the scrolls. Hypatia is gone, her students are gone, her work is gone, but not the questions she left behind. What if thinking for yourself was the most dangerous act of all? The smoke thickens. It hugs the ceiling like a jealous ghost, curling into the corners, seeping through cracks in the stone. You hold your robe to your mouth as you push forward, eyes watering, lungs aching. This isn't metaphor anymore. The fire is real, it's moving, and it has no patience for scholars. Somewhere behind you, a shelf collapses with a groan like a dying animal. But still, you press on, because you haven't seen the worst yet. Not the heat, not the screams, not even the silent death of knowledge under soot and flame. The worst is this: no one can agree on how the fire started. In school, you may have heard the simple version. Julius Caesar, cornered in Alexandria during his civil war with Pompey in 48 BCE, ordered his ships in the harbor to be set ablaze. The fire spread, unintended, regrettable. Oops. Historians like Plutarch and Dio Cassius mention it in passing. Some scrolls burned. Shrug. But that's not the only version. And it may not even be true. Some sources, carefully, nervously, suggest it wasn't just an accident, that Caesar's men didn't merely watch as flames spread from dock to depot, but allowed it, or even aimed it. Why? Because the library was seen not just as a temple of knowledge, but as a weapon of information, and information in the wrong hands is far more dangerous than any sword. Some historians believe that the portion of the library destroyed in Caesar's time was the warehouse, a storage area near the docks where newly seized scrolls were held for cataloging. It may not have been the main library housed within the Mausion, but a branch, a feeder. Still devastating, still irreplaceable. But it wasn't the only fire. It may not have even been the biggest one. You step through a corridor scorched black, the paint blistered off murals of muses, philosophers, stars. The air is gritty, bitter. You cough. Because here's the truth that no schoolbook quite admits. No one knows how many times the library burned. One theory suggests 3 major incidents. Another claims 4. And a chilling few whisper it never burned at all, but was emptied over generations, silently, strategically, a slow erasure masked by a dramatic ending. Because fire makes a good story, and a better distraction. Imagine it, scrolls removed one by one over decades, smuggled out by conquerors, clergy, spies, quietly destroyed or kept, hidden in private vaults, rewritten under new names, fed into the foundations of rising faiths and falling empires. Then, once the place was mostly hollow, then came the fire, a symbol, a punctuation mark. And everyone blames Caesar. Neat, convenient, permanent. You pass through a crumbled archway into what must have once been a reading room. The walls are cracked, the shelves skeletal, but a few benches remain, burned on the edges. One scroll lies curled in the center of the room, untouched by flame, as if preserved by sheer defiance. You crouch beside it. It's in Greek, faded, fragile. You read a single phrase. He who controls the archives shapes the world. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? The frightening possibility that someone, somewhere, understood exactly how dangerous it was to let everyone think for themselves, to read, to imagine, to question what was handed down. And that person didn't slip on a torch and knock over a pile of books. They planned it. Historians still argue whether Caesar's fire could have reached the library at all. The docks were a ways off. There may have been fire breaks. Some claim the loss was exaggerated centuries later by writers nostalgic for a golden age that never quite existed. Others say only the official depot burned. Thousands of scrolls, yes, but not the whole. And then there's the theory that what really burned wasn't the scrolls, but the idea. The idea that knowledge should be free, shared, protected. That was the true heresy. Here's a strange little tidbit. During the French occupation of Egypt in the 1790s, Napoleon allegedly ordered his men to search beneath Alexandria's catacombs for signs of the original library. Some say he believed Caesar's fire was a lie, that the scrolls were buried, sealed in stone vaults deep beneath the city. They found nothing. Or maybe they did, and just didn't tell anyone. The conspiracies pile high. Some say the Vatican holds fragments of the library in its secret archives. Others claim the British Museum has copies disguised as later discoveries. A few even insist the Rosicrucians or Freemasons intercepted ancient scrolls and built their entire symbolic systems around them. One fringe theory, and yes, it's out there, argues that the fire wasn't real at all, not in the way we think, that it was metaphor, invented centuries later to justify the disappearance of ideas that no longer fit into the dominant worldview. After all, it's easier to blame fire than admit a purge. You brush dust from the scroll and roll it back into place. You don't take it. Somehow it doesn't feel like it belongs to you, or anyone. It's a ghost of something once so vast, so luminous, that even a single line feels too heavy to carry. You rise. Smoke billows through the window now. Far off, you hear shouting again, and was that the crack of a collapsing wall? Time to move. But as you step away, a final chilling thought slips into your mind like a spark in dry grass. What if we keep blaming fire? Because the alternative is too terrible to face? What if Alexandria wasn't lost to accident, but to intention? You move deeper now, past columns blackened at their bases, past faded mosaics that once gleamed with pride. The air grows thick with dust, not just from fire, but from age, from time, from the slow decay of greatness, and for the first time since you arrived, the library feels quiet. Not silent, but quiet, like it's waiting for you to ask the wrong question. Because here's a weird thing, no one knows how big the great library of Alexandria truly was. And the deeper you walk into its half-ruined chambers, the stranger that fact becomes. Some say it held 40,000 scrolls. Others say 400,000. A tenfold difference, like calling a pond an ocean or mistaking a closet for a cathedral. Imagine the difference between a small-town library and Google's entire cloud. Both have books. Only one can reshape civilization. You step into a rotunda where the ceiling has collapsed inward. Shafts of dusty light pour in through cracks, and there, in the center of the floor, is a pedestal, burned but not broken. The faint outline of where a statue once stood is still visible on the base. Probably a muse, maybe Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, or Clio, the muse of history, or perhaps it was meant to represent knowledge itself, wearing no name, holding no scroll, because what it held was too vast to be described. Mainstream historical sources often reference that the library's collection grew under successive Ptolemaic kings, especially Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who reigned from 285 to 246 BCE. He expanded the library's reach aggressively. If it was written, he wanted it. If it wasn't written yet, he wanted someone to write it. So scrolls poured in, stolen, copied, commissioned, translated. The library even employed teams of scribes whose only job was to duplicate text en masse. It was an obsession, a hunger. But here's the problem. There's no official list, no inventory, no final log. And so, everything becomes guesswork. Historians still argue whether the library ever truly held hundreds of thousands of scrolls at once, or whether that number is romantic myth, a poetic exaggeration by later writers longing for a golden age that never quite was. You find a fallen plaque at your feet, it's cracked in half. You bend and lift it gently, Greek letters etched in soft marble, chipped by time. You can just make out part of a word, bibliotheki, bibliothèque, library. But this isn't some tidy archive with dewy decimal labels. This was a breathing thing. It evolved, expanded, shrunk, was duplicated, was burned, rebuilt, moved, hidden, and perhaps it never existed as a single structure, but as a network. Rooms in the palace, vaults under temple, scrolls tucked into the Serapeum, warehouses near the harbor, annexes in private homes. The idea of one vast library, that's convenient, beautiful, but maybe misleading. There's a theory, quiet, academic, but oddly disturbing, that the Great Library wasn't a place. It was a project. A national, and perhaps imperial, effort to own all human knowledge, not to share it, but to own it. That changes the story, doesn't it? Because then the fire isn't just a loss. It's a power shift. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient reports suggest the library didn't just collect scrolls, but also practiced a kind of aggressive editing. Versions of plays were compared, and the better lines chosen. Foreign texts were translated, often adapted to fit Greek sensibilities. There are hints that entire philosophical schools were reinterpreted to better serve the political narrative of the time. So the library wasn't just a vault. It was a filter. And if you control the filter, you control the past, the future, the conversation. You reach a small alcove, half hidden behind a cracked pillar. Inside, a few scrolls remain, too damaged to read, too sacred to abandon. The shelves sag. One scroll is bloated from water damage. The ink melted into the papyrus like bruises. Another has teeth marks. Rat? Dog? Desperate monk? Unclear. You don't touch them. You just sit for a moment. Because here's the truth the fire never touched. Even if 400,000 scrolls were stored here, the idea was bigger than the number, bigger than the structure, bigger than Alexandria itself. It was the first real attempt in human history to say, let's gather everything, let's know the world, let's preserve it all, the good, the bad, the weird, the wondrous. And that idea is terrifying. To the insecure, to the powerful, to the dogmatic. Some believe that's why the numbers were never written down, not because the librarians forgot, but because they feared admitting what they had. Knowledge, after all, is dangerous in quantity. You don't need 400,000 scrolls to spark a rebellion. You only need one. A scroll that explains the stars' move without divine permission. A scroll that shows how to calculate a ship's route to distant lands without priestly blessings. A scroll that questions whether kings are appointed by gods or simply loud men with swords. So, maybe the real mystery isn't how big the library was. Maybe it's how much truth you can bury with one good fire and a lot of forgetfulness. And maybe the biggest lie is that it was all destroyed. You glance back toward the smoke-choked corridor, toward the hiss and crackle of flames consuming dreams. Then you look down at the scroll with the teeth marks. You smile, because even in ruin, knowledge has a strange way of surviving. The floor creaks beneath your step, which is strange, because the floor is marble. You glance down, cracks spiderweb through the stone like stress fractures in an ancient skull. Something once pushed hard here, something heavy, or many somethings, carts, soldiers, stampedes of scribes clutching what they could. It's hard to tell, but the further you walk, the more the library feels less like a sanctuary, and more like a crime scene. Not a crime of passion, a crime of logistics, because what happened here wasn't just destruction. It was theft. You enter a hallway with tall windows, the panes long shattered. sea breeze wafting through like a visiting ghost. The sun outside is setting, casting long slashes of amber across the floor, and in the light you see something glinting, small, metal, and out of place. A clasp, a book clasp to be exact, the kind used to bind codices, not scrolls, books, which means it wasn't ancient, it was added later. This hallway saw more than one age pass through it. And that's when it hits you. Alexandria wasn't just raided once. It was copied, borrowed, plundered systematically by empire after empire, not always with fire, sometimes with scribes. This is the chapter the textbooks leave out, the piracy of knowledge. It begins with a seemingly innocent Ptolemaic policy. Every ship that entered Alexandria's harbor was required to surrender any written material on board: books, scrolls, maps, manifests, letters. These were taken to the library, copied by trained scribes, and, here's the kicker, the originals were kept, the copies were returned. Nice, right? Generous, efficient. Also, deeply shady. You imagine a bewildered trader from Phoenicia handing over a rare herbal manual, only to get back a slightly sloppier copy with a few missing ingredients. You imagine Greek sailors losing navigational charts that had taken generations to compile. And you imagine scholars from distant lands learning that their life's work had been absorbed, without permission, into Alexandria's glorious brain. Historians still argue whether this practice was legal, moral, or brilliant. Most agree it was all three, but it earned Alexandria a reputation, a place where books went in and rarely came out. You run your fingers along a ledge dusted with soot and salt. There's a faint carving scratched into the stone, crudely etched, like someone did it in haste. It reads, "They took my words and called them theirs." You're not sure if it's ancient or modern, doesn't matter. It still stings. Here's a lesser known but well-attested historical fact. One of the library's most controversial acts involved acquiring a complete set of Athenian official texts, including plays by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The Ptolemies offered the Athenians a large sum in gold as a deposit, promising to return the originals after copying. But after making immaculate copies, Alexandria kept the originals, forfeited the deposit, and sent the fakes back. Nice scrolls you got there. Shame if they never returned. But let's take it a step darker. Some fringe researchers argue that the library may have rewritten certain texts to fit its agenda. Imagine, you steal a book, copy it with edits, destroy the original, and now your version is canon. History as a controlled narrative, knowledge not preserved but manufactured. Think that's a stretch? Consider this. Even today, ancient texts exist in dozens of versions, many with contradictory passages. Who changed them? Why? And when you trace the origins, they often lead back here, to this place, to this fire. You pass into another chamber, smaller, with stone benches and a wall map of the ancient world. Africa, Asia, Europe, a rough sketch of India's coastline. One corner shows a speculative landmass labeled Antios. Could it be Antarctica, or just a fantasy? The library didn't just gather knowledge, it constructed worldviews. And that's what made it so threatening. Because if you control what people know, you control what they think is possible. That's why some believe the real destruction of the library didn't happen in one blaze, but through decades of quiet sabotage, scrolls misfiled, originals swapped for corrupt copies, edits inserted, languages mistranslated, one idea at a time, shaved down, dulled, made forgettable. And the scariest part? The average person never noticed. You glance at a niche in the wall, empty now, but once it might have held a manuscript from India, perhaps a Sanskrit treatise on astronomy or medicine. Alexandria had a reputation for absorbing the wisdom of faraway lands. Babylonian star charts, Egyptian medical papyri, Buddhist logic from the East. But how much of it was preserved, and how much was rewritten? Here's a quirky tidbit to sleep on. Some scrolls in the library were so tightly guarded that they could only be read by a designated scholar under supervision. Others were stored in sealed rooms, possibly due to their content being considered heretical, explosive, or deeply confusing. We don't know what they contained, we only know they existed. And now they don't. Maybe they were burned. Maybe they were stolen. Or maybe they were never meant to survive. Because one theory, and it's a chilling one, is that the library wasn't destroyed by outsiders. It was dismantled from within, by scholars who feared its power, by priests who resented its doubt, by rulers who understood that in the wrong hands, or even the right ones, ideas could topple thrones. You hear footsteps again, echoes, yours or someone else's. You turn, but no one is there. Just a draft curling through the window, rattling a loose tile on the floor. Maybe it's just the wind. Maybe the library is remembering. And maybe it's still guarding a few secrets. The air changes again. Darker now, thicker, not with smoke, but with a feeling, like velvet soaked in ink, like standing just outside a dream and knowing something inside it is waiting for you. Watching. You're deeper than you've ever gone. Past the scorched marble, beyond the cracked mosaics, under arches half buried in silence. You've reached the part of the library that isn't supposed to exist. You pause before a low, arched doorway, half collapsed, almost hidden behind a wall mural of an ibis in flight. Someone has scrawled something in the dust across the threshold, one word in Greek. Atlantis. Oh boy. You're about to enter the zone where mainstream history ends, and the weird theories begin. You duck under the stone arch, and immediately the temperature drops. This isn't just another room. This feels like a vault. Columns stretch upward and disappear into shadow. The walls are lined with alcoves, but there are no scrolls here now. Only the impressions of what used to be. It's quiet. Too quiet. Because this is the part of the library that, according to some, held knowledge that wasn't just ahead of its time. It shouldn't have existed at all. Let's get something straight. Mainstream scholars agree that Alexandria's library housed works from far beyond the Greek world. It gathered texts from Babylon, India, Persia, Egypt, and possibly China. But some fringe theorists take that a step further. A very big step. They believe that somewhere, deep within the restricted archives of the library, lay scrolls from Atlantis. That's right. The mythical lost civilization, the one Plato claimed had immense knowledge and mysterious technology, wiped off the face of the earth in a single day and night. Ridiculous? Maybe. But you're standing in a chamber with no natural light, surrounded by alcoves built for items far heavier than scrolls. And scratched into the stone, barely visible but there, are strange symbols, spirals, concentric circles, stylized waves, symbols that don't quite match Greek or Coptic or even ancient Egyptian glyphs. Some claim these symbols are Atlantean. Others say, just coincidence, decoration, swirls are popular, don't get carried away. But that doesn't stop the stories. According to one of the more persistent legends, an Egyptian priest in Sais told Solon, Plato's ancestor, that Egypt preserved records of a massive, advanced civilization that predated Greece by thousands of years. Some say those records were stored here, in Alexandria, translated into Greek, then quietly suppressed or mysteriously lost before they could reach the wider world. One scroll, allegedly, described a land beyond the Pillars of Heracles, rich in resources, skilled in geometry, advanced in architecture. It hinted at temples that harnessed sunlight, crystals used for healing, and vast aerial maps long before human flight. Sure, sounds wild, sounds fake. But here's the thing. Historians still argue whether Plato made up Atlantis as a metaphor, or was reporting something he truly believed. There's no consensus, no proof either way. And Alexandria? It had the motive, the means, and the obsession to gather even the strangest stories, especially ones that whispered of ancient knowledge waiting to be reborn. You move toward one of the deeper alcoves, and your foot bumps something. A box, charred, metal reinforced, long since pried open. You kneel and examine it. Inside, nothing but scorched parchment flakes. But on the inner lid, scratched in with what looks like a stylus, are coordinates. Latitude, longitude. You do the math. Middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, that's not ominous at all. Here's a fringe tidbit to fuel your dreams tonight. Some theorists believe that Alexandria's most guarded scrolls were written in a language that no one living could read. Even then, they suggest it was pre-dynastic, from before Egypt's known history, possibly from a civilization that Egypt learned from rather than the other way around. According to this theory, these scrolls were studied by Alexandria's most elite scholars, kept in sealed rooms, decoded slowly over decades, and then one day, poof, gone, either lost in the fire or deliberately erased from memory. Maybe the scrolls were destroyed. Maybe they were stolen. Or maybe, and this is the creepiest version of the theory, they were locked away not to be read until humanity was ready. You shift in the cold air and feel something strange beneath your hand. A groove, a pattern etched into the stone floor, a perfect circle divided into 12 equal parts, zodiac signs, lunar cycles, a map. You can't tell, but it means something. And that's what makes Alexandria so terrifying to those who want easy answers. Because it suggests, just maybe, that humans once knew more than we do now, that we lost something or chose to forget it, that our progress isn't a straight line, but a cycle. Rise, fall, erase, repeat. You stare into the darkness. Some say the knowledge here could have launched us to the stars by the year 800, ended famine by the Middle Ages, cured diseases we only named centuries later. And instead, it's ash, because someone, somewhere, decided we weren't ready, or decided they didn't want us to be. You take one last look at the circle in the floor. Then you turn and walk back toward the light. But something follows. Not footsteps, just a thought. What if Plato was telling the truth? What if Atlantis didn't sink into the sea, but into the library? The corridor narrows again. The walls tighten like ribs around a chest holding its breath. The air has changed, warmer but heavier, like the inside of a sealed jar. You can hear your footsteps clearly now. No more fire crackle, no more wind, just stone, echo, heartbeat, and something else. A low hum. You're not imagining it. It's not electrical, obviously. This is ancient stone, not circuitry. But still, it's there. A pressure in the air, like silence vibrating, like a thought trying to become sound. And it gets louder the further you walk into this part of the library. The part that religion built, and then dismantled. You enter a grand chamber with shattered columns, soot-blackened icons, and a half-collapsed dome open to the stars. A place of ceremony, maybe, or exile, once sacred, now ghosted. This is the part of the story where things get awkward, because fire is easy to blame. But scrolls can vanish in other ways. With the stroke of a pen, with a decree, with a sermon. You walk slowly, your hand brushing faded frescoes of birds and flames and serpents coiling through the margins of long-lost books. A few still cling to the walls, faces scratched off, words smeared beyond recognition. This is where the lines between curation and censorship get blurry. It's no secret that Christianity, as it grew into an institutional power, viewed much of Alexandria's content as heretical. Pagan rituals, alchemical manuscripts, treatises on astrology, reincarnation, sacred geometry, works that challenge the idea of a single, all-knowing divine authority. And as Christianity merged with empire, it did what all empires do with competing systems. It replaced them. Historians still argue whether the final destruction of the library came under Theophilus, the patriarch of Alexandria in the late 4th century, or during the reign of his successor, Cyril. Both were involved in purging pagan temples, including the famed Serapeum, a grand structure that some believe held a major portion of the library's remaining texts. The official story? The temples were dismantled by decree, and what remained was swept away in righteous cleansing. But there's another version. One whispered, softly, carefully. It says the destruction wasn't righteous. It was strategic. It wasn't a mob burning scrolls in blind rage. It was a targeted purge. Remove the dangerous texts, silence dissent, seal the knowledge, rewrite the record. Theophilus is even said to have led parades mocking the old gods, and dragging sacred relics through the streets like conquered enemies. Scrolls were burned publicly, statues smashed. The message was clear: your knowledge is no longer welcome here. You move to the center of the chamber where a plinth stands, cracked, fire-scarred. Something was mounted here, a statue, a relic, maybe even a sacred book. It's gone now, but you can still feel the absence of it, like a tooth pulled, leaving nerve and memory behind. And now, for your quirky tidbit of the night, some medieval texts claim that scrolls from Alexandria survived, hidden by monks, smuggled east by merchants, even taken by Arab scholars centuries later. One popular legend tells of a single scroll containing an alchemical formula for eternal life, hidden beneath a Christian monastery near the Nile. Its location, lost, or maybe erased. But let's step back. You might ask, why would the church destroy knowledge? Isn't knowledge good? Yes, but not all knowledge. Not the kind that competes. Not the kind that undermines doctrine. Not the kind that suggests divinity might be optional. Alexandria had scrolls that described the world as a system of natural laws, mathematics, astronomy, logic. It was a place where gods were questioned, dissected, even denied. And that kind of thinking, it doesn't sit well in a world built on faith. So the scrolls were removed, the scholars silenced, the gods replaced, and the library, once the world's brain, was lobotomized. But here's the twist. Not everyone in the early church wanted this. In fact, some preserved parts of the knowledge, copied it, hid it, reframed it through acceptable lenses. After all, Christianity wasn't a monolith. There were factions, philosophies, debates. Historians still debate whether the burning of Alexandria's knowledge was widespread or selective, whether the scrolls were truly lost or simply renamed, recast, rewritten. Maybe Plato didn't burn. Maybe he just came back as St. Augustine with footnotes. You sit on the edge of a crumbling bench. Above you, moonlight pours in through the cracked dome. You wonder how many people have sat here over the centuries, how many of them were scribes, or spies, or thieves. And maybe one of them was a priest reading a scroll he wasn't supposed to and asking himself, why would God fear this knowledge? You hear the hum again. It's in your bones now. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's memory vibrating. Or maybe it's the voices of scrolls that refuse to stay silent. Because even now, long after the ash settled, Alexandria haunts us, not just for what was lost, but for what we chose not to save. And for the burning question that still echoes in every closed archive and sealed vault, what did we destroy in the name of belief? You descend. A spiral staircase, slick with condensation, curves down beneath the bones of the library, beneath marble and ash, beneath the shattered husk of the known world. The stairs creak like old knees. The air is heavier here, not smoky, not moldy, just quiet in a way that doesn't feel natural. You're entering the Serapeum, or what's left of it. To most, the Serapeum was a temple, grand, soaring, lined with columns and statues of Serapis, a Greco-Egyptian god invented to unite cultures. But to those who whispered in back rooms and tucked scrolls into their sleeves, it was something else entirely. It was the library's last stand. After Caesar's fire, after the riots, after Hypatia's death, after the Christian mob swept through Alexandria, like a sandstorm with a crucifix, this is where the final fragments of the library were hidden, protected, worshipped, or buried, depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether the Serapeum actually held the original scrolls from the Great Library or just copies, scraps, an echo of what once was. Some believe it served as a secondary archive, a satellite. Others insist it was a full-blown vault, sealed deep within to keep knowledge from burning. You reach the bottom step and your feet crunch on something granular. Ash. Still. Centuries later. You light your torch. The walls are smooth, carved limestone. The chamber is circular with 4 archways leading off like compass points. Statues lie broken. Reliefs of ibis-headed scribes are chipped beyond recognition. But you recognize what this was. A sanctuary. Not for gods. For ideas. This is where the scrolls came to wait out the storm. There's a tale, half folklore, half speculation, that as the main library was collapsing, a group of librarians and philosophers formed a kind of resistance. They gathered as many scrolls as they could, sealed them in clay jars, and stashed them in the Serapeum. Some say they formed a secret order dedicated to guarding this knowledge, passing it down in coded chants, rituals, and diagrams tattooed beneath the skin. A bit dramatic? Sure. But then again, you're standing in a temple that shouldn't exist anymore, in a chamber that, even now, vibrates with something unspoken. You walk past a cracked urn. It has the faint imprint of papyrus inside, long since turned to powder. A tragedy? Yes, but also a clue. Because here's something most people miss. Even after the Serapeum was sacked, officially destroyed in 391 CE, knowledge still found ways to slip through the cracks. Not all the scrolls were burned, some were hidden, some were copied, some were smuggled out. Monks, merchants, mystics, even a single scroll, carried in the folds of a robe, could seed a renaissance centuries later. That's the strange comfort buried in this ruin. Knowledge wants to survive, and it's very good at hiding. Here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. Some say a particular scroll, stored deep in the Serapeum, contained not words, but music, a musical composition written in mathematical ratios, meant to induce altered states of consciousness, healing, awakening, communication with the divine. No one knows, because no one knows where it is, or if it ever existed. But the claim surfaces again and again in weird places, a medieval text here, an Islamic commentary there, a Gnostic whisper. They all describe a lost chord of Alexandria, music meant to unlock parts of the mind that reason alone couldn't reach. Sounds nuts. But then again, what is a library if not a place to contain the madness of every generation? You turn down one of the side corridors, narrow, claustrophobic. The torchlight wobbles. The walls here are different, closer. There are tiny alcoves every few feet like a catacomb, but not for bones. For scrolls. Once. Now, they're empty, hollow sockets in the skull of history. Some are blackened, others scraped clean, but in one you find something strange. Not a scroll, but a map, burned at the edges, drawn on animal skin. You hold it up to the light. It doesn't resemble any known geography. It's a spiral, with cities arranged in rings. At the center, a sun, radiating outward. You blink. It looks like a diagram of thought, a cartography of ideas, a map not of land, but of understanding. Did it come from Atlantis, Persia, some philosopher's dream? No one knows, because this was the place of all the things no one was supposed to know. You walk on, deeper into the side chamber. Here, the walls are carved with text, scratched in desperation, maybe after the fire began. One phrase repeats in different hands, different dialects. Remember what they feared. That's the core, isn't it? Because the Serapeum didn't fall to fire alone. It fell to fear. Fear of books that questioned divine authority. Fear of science that unraveled myth. Fear of medicine that healed without blessing. Fear of philosophy that turned gods into metaphors. And so, they smashed it. Not just the shelves, but the possibility. And that's what burns the most, even now. Not just what was lost, but what we were almost brave enough to become. You place the map gently back in its alcove. You doubt anyone will find it again. Or maybe they will. Maybe that's what this place is now. Not a graveyard, but a seed vault. Waiting. The walls begin to sweat. No, not literally, but it feels that way. Humid, heavy, close. The kind of air that clings to you, that makes parchment curl and ink run and minds waver. You can't tell if the damp is from the sea, the stone, or time itself, but it seeps into your skin like a memory you can't name. And maybe that's fitting, because now you're walking into a memory that's still being fought over. This is the part of the library's story that gets really messy. You know about Caesar, you know about Theophilus, you know about fire and mobs and scrolls turned to ash. But what you might not know is that there's another chapter, centuries later, that's still argued in hushed tones across lecture halls and comment threads. The Islamic conquest. 642 CE. Alexandria falls to the Rashidun Caliphate under the general Amr ibn al-As. Egypt becomes part of a new empire. and with it, so does the city once crowned with scrolls. And here, depending on who you ask, the library either finally died, or didn't exist at all. You pause in a hallway where soot has painted the upper walls a permanent gray. In the floor are faint ruts, grooves worn by the passing of carts or perhaps centuries of sandaled feet. This was a place of traffic, movement, transfer. Ideas went in, ideas came out. But in 642, something changed. According to some historical accounts, particularly one written centuries later by a Christian bishop named Gregory Bar Hebraeus, Caliph Omar is said to have issued a chilling decree regarding the library's scrolls. If the books agree with the Quran, they are redundant. If they disagree, they are heresy. Therefore, destroy them. And just like that, allegedly, what remained of Alexandria's knowledge was fed to the furnaces of the city's bathhouses. It is said the scrolls burned for 6 months, keeping bathwater hot for soldiers and citizens. A strange afterlife for genius. But, and this is important, historians still argue whether any of this ever happened. There are problems with the story, big ones. The source was written centuries later, far from Egypt, and some say it was meant more as a religious propaganda than reliable chronicle. Other Islamic records from the time make no mention of the library's destruction. In fact, early Islamic scholars were notorious preservers of knowledge. They translated Greek texts, copied scientific works, built vast libraries of their own in Baghdad and Damascus, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, directly inspired by the Alexandrian ideal. So what gives? Was it propaganda? Did the library already lie in ruins by the time the caliphate arrived? Or, here's the wild theory, did they find something and then quietly make it disappear? You step into a small circular chamber, walls aligned with empty niches. There's one object left, a tile mosaic on the floor, barely intact, depicting a globe surrounded by script in both Greek and Arabic. It's not just symbolic, it's suspiciously specific. Because the Islamic Golden Age that followed, filled with math, astronomy, medicine, engineering, didn't spring from nothing. It grew from somewhere, and some believe fragments of the great library were carried eastward, disguised, translated, woven into new philosophies under new names. Not burned, absorbed. One theory claims that scrolls were moved in camel trains to places like Basra, Kufa, and eventually Baghdad, where they were recopied and buried in books attributed to new authors. The original names, lost in translation, or edited out. Imagine the irony, that the very texts once erased by empire were later reborn by another, and no one recognized them. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. There's a mathematical problem known as the Alhazen problem, which involves finding the point on a curved mirror where a beam of light will reflect to hit a specific target. It's named after the Islamic scientist Ibn al-Haytham, but some whisper that similar geometric descriptions were found in earlier Greek fragments, possibly Alexandrian. So, did Ibn al-Haytham discover it independently? Or was he building on something Alexandria had already discovered and forgotten? You crouch by the mosaic and run your fingers across the tiles. One is loose. You pull it free. Behind it, just damp earth. But still, someone placed it there, covered it, preserved it. So maybe the library didn't end with fire. Maybe it ended with a translation. With names changed, titles shifted, authorship blurred, until no one could prove what had come from where. And that's the genius of a quiet erasure. No flame, no mob, just silence, just forgetting. You rise again and move to the archway. A shadow flickers across the far wall. Nothing solid, just suggestion. But it leaves you wondering, was Alexandria's knowledge destroyed by conquest? Or simply rebranded? You emerge into a corridor that feels wrong. Not destroyed, not burned, just off. Like a stage after a play has ended, the props are there, the silence is there, but the soul is missing. The room was meant to hold something, and now it doesn't, and it knows. Here, the walls are bare, no murals, no carvings, just plain stone, once whitewashed, now stained by age. The only light comes from a high slit in the ceiling where moonlight pours in like silver fog. Dust dances in it, tiny ghosts. This isn't grandeur. This is aftermath. Because now you've reached the ghost trail, the legends of what survived. They say not everything in the great library burned. They say some of it walked away. You reach a niche in the wall where something once stood, a cabinet, a pedestal. Hard to tell, but scratched into the stone is a triangle, simple, sharp, unmistakably intentional, and beneath it, in Latin, ipsa scientia potestas est. Knowledge itself is power. It shouldn't be here, not this deep, not in Latin, not carved so carefully. Because now you're stepping into the shadows beyond the fire, where whispers begin and fragments flicker like candlelight. One persistent theory says that after the final blow, whichever one it was, Roman, Christian, or Caliphate, a few scholars fled the ruins, not just with memories or ideas, but with actual scrolls. Not many, maybe only a dozen, but enough. They didn't stay in Egypt. They fled into the desert, into Sinai, Ethiopia, Syria. Some crossed into Europe, some turned east, and some allegedly vanished into monastic silence, carrying forbidden texts into places no one would think to look. Coptic monasteries. Yes, those quiet stone buildings tucked into desert cliffs, where robed figures chant beneath the stars. Some say they preserved more than just scripture. Some say a few of them were built near caves, containing sealed jars, containing scrolls. Impossible? Not entirely. We have the Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945 by a farmer digging near the Nile. Dozens of leather-bound codices filled with Gnostic texts thought lost for over 1,000 years. Where did they come from? No one knows. But the parallels to Alexandria are hard to ignore. Some believe they're only the tip of the iceberg. You step further into the hall. A breeze moves through, a dry one like a whisper from desert sands. You hear the faint jingle of something metal. You stop. Nothing. Just your imagination? Or something else? There's a legend, fringe, naturally, that some scrolls were smuggled eastward along the Silk Road, that traders tucked fragments into spice caravans, embedding ancient wisdom into Sufi teachings, Zoroastrian texts, even Chinese alchemical treatises. This theory claims that Alexandria's ghost walked to India, to Persia, even to Tibet, and that we still read pieces of it today without knowing their true origin. In this telling, the library was never entirely lost. It was scattered, and scattered things leave trails. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 2002, a set of previously uncatalogued papyri turned up in an old box at the University of Basel, ancient Greek, medical in nature. Some scholars now think they may be linked to Herophilos, the Alexandrian physician who dissected human cadavers and mapped parts of the nervous system long before modern medicine caught up. How did they end up in Switzerland? No one can say. And that's the haunting beauty of all this. We keep finding crumbs. In old monasteries, in forgotten boxes, in mismarked collections. Every decade or so, a scrap turns up. Just enough to remind us that maybe, just maybe, the library never fully died. It simply hid. And maybe someone helped it. You reach a sealed wooden door, ancient, reinforced with iron bands. It's cracked down the middle, but still holds. You push gently. It doesn't budge. But on the frame, scratched into the wood in small, jagged Greek, is a final message. They will search the ashes. We will walk east. You step back. Because the scariest theory isn't that the library was burned. It's that someone made a decision to let it die in Alexandria, so it could live somewhere else. And we don't know where, yet. The air thickens again. It's not smoke this time. It's something heavier, older. You feel it in your chest as you descend into the lowest level of the library ruins, into the belly of what once was a vault, or maybe a tomb, depending on your interpretation. Your torch sputters slightly, as if even the flame is hesitant. This is where the myths truly spiral, where conspiracy stops whispering and starts chanting. This is the place of the alchemical vault theory. A theory that says the Great Library's most dangerous scrolls were never shelved. They were buried. You're walking down a narrow ramp now, too steep to be ceremonial, too smooth to be natural. The walls here are slick with condensation, the stone sweating secrets it was never meant to hold. You reach the bottom, and there it is. A stone door covered in carvings so worn they look more like bruises than glyphs. But one shape stands out. A double helix. Wait, what? You step closer. It could be something else, of course. A symbol of intertwined snakes. A caduceus. But still, the resemblance to DNA is unsettling. A modern lens, maybe. Or not. You push. The door shifts with a reluctant groan, and you're inside. This is not a library. This is a chamber. The walls are lined not with scrolls, but with sealed alcoves. Each has a stone relief above it, symbols, faces, stars, geometric patterns. The floor is circular, the ceiling domed, and in the center, a basin. Metal. Cracked. Lined with a residue that glints strangely in the torchlight. You step forward and peer inside. It smells like mercury. And that's when it hits you. You're standing in the room some believe was the library's core. Not its archive, not its public face, its engine. A place where texts weren't just read, but tested, where ideas weren't just recorded, but weaponized. According to the alchemical vault theory, the library stored scrolls describing more than science or math. It held records of transformation, not metaphorical, literal. They say ancient priests, possibly even predating the Ptolemies, used mercury, gold, and botanical resins in combination with sacred geometry and chant to induce altered states, heal illness, or change the body or the mind. Fringe? Absolutely. But let's say it out loud. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians practiced a form of chemistry we no longer understand, and Alexandria inherited their texts. The Serapeum's underground vaults were real. Mercury basins were found in other ancient sites, most notably beneath Teotihuacan, thousands of miles away. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe ancient civilizations were trading more than silk and spices. There's a fragment of a scroll, long lost but referenced in a 10th century Arabic commentary, describing a liquid mirror used to observe the positions of stars within the earth. Stargazing underground. You look around. Every niche in this vault may once have held something world-shaking. Scrolls, artifacts, vials. And if someone wanted to erase it all, this would be the place to seal. Not burn. Bury. Here's your quirky detail for the night. In 1898, French archaeologists found a battery in Baghdad, a clay jar with a copper cylinder and iron rod, potentially capable of generating small electrical charges. It's now called the Baghdad Battery. And some speculate Alexandria may have had dozens of similar devices. They're used for what? Electroplating? Ritual? Light? Maybe to power whatever this was. Because the vault theory doesn't just say scrolls were hidden here. It says machines were. Devices, relics, mechanisms whose purpose we still don't understand. That the scrolls didn't just describe knowledge, they described how to build things. And those things were locked away for the safety of mankind, or the convenience of the elite. You stare again at the basin. Imagine someone lowering a scroll into mercury to test its vibrational integrity. Imagine mirrors angled to reflect celestial events into underground pools. Imagine coded language, designed so only the initiated could decipher instructions for creating sound-based tools, or healing frequencies, or even manipulation of light. Impossible? That depends entirely on what you're willing to believe was erased. You crouch by one of the alcoves. It's empty, but the symbol above it looks familiar. A spiral overlaid with a triangle. You've seen it before, in carvings, in books, in secret societies. Because here's the final twist in the vault theory. They say some people know. They say this knowledge wasn't destroyed. It was taken. Locked away in the Vatican's secret archives, hidden beneath the British Museum, guarded by organizations with long names and longer memories, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, even rumored breakaway civilizations. That's the craziest part, isn't it? Not that it's gone, but that someone might still be using it. You rise slowly, heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of the question that burns hotter than any fire Alexandria ever saw. What if knowledge isn't just power? What if knowledge is the one thing too dangerous to be allowed? You take one last look at the basin. Then you extinguish your torch, and the chamber remembers what it was. You climb, back up the winding passageway, each footstep like a soft drumbeat on hollow stone. The alchemical vault fades behind you, swallowed again by the dark. Above, the ruins creak as the city settles, ancient stone shifting in its sleep. But the silence here doesn't feel like peace. It feels like a held breath, because the deeper you go into Alexandria's mystery, the more obvious it becomes. Not all erasure needs fire. Some of it wears robes. Some of it carries scrolls of its own. Some of it smiles. You step into a long, narrow hallway with rows of broken niches and frescoes scraped clean. Not burned, scraped, as if someone came through, not with torches, but with intent, a chisel, a plan, a checklist. This is the part of the library story that gets under your skin, because sometimes knowledge isn't lost. It's replaced. You walk slowly, your hand brushing the grooves left behind by whatever text or icon once lined this wall. There's no soot, no blast marks, just absence, clean, clinical, like the world's most thorough theft. Historians don't all agree on the exact timeline of the library's destruction. They'll tell you about Caesar's fire, the Serapeum's fall, the Islamic conquest, but they're less comfortable talking about the in-between. The centuries where Alexandria still existed, physically, but its meaning was eroding. One scroll at a time. Here's the theory. After the fire stopped, the replacement began. Scribes arrived, not to copy what was left, but to rewrite it, to take old texts and edit them, translate them through new lenses, inject them with acceptable theology, remove certain names, add others, change context, swap soul for spirit, logic for faith, discovery for revelation. And once rewritten, the original was no longer needed. The most efficient way to erase truth, someone once said, is to give it a new name. You enter what must have once been a scriptorium, a workroom for scribes. The benches are still here, stone seats worn smooth by years of repetition. On one wall, someone tried to scratch out a quote. You can barely read it, but it says, "We did not destroy the words, we only made them kinder." You sit on a bench and realize how terrifying that idea really is. Because Alexandria may not have been burned to the ground in one night. It may have been revised into oblivion over centuries, quietly, elegantly, by educated men with perfect handwriting and controlled vocabularies. And when the time came, the world wouldn't even remember what had been changed. You glance at a mosaic on the floor, a globe, stylized, incomplete. The Americas are missing, of course, but more interestingly, so is Africa, entirely absent, just ocean where a continent should be. Not accident, omission, because another way to erase knowledge is simply not to draw it. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. There are Roman-era maps that suggest knowledge of lands beyond what we assumed they knew, but those maps are full of weird gaps. Not "here be dragons," but "here be nothing." Entire regions labeled only with clouds, wind, or vague Latin riddles. Why? Because it's hard to control a world you can't rewrite. Historians still argue whether the library's decline was physical or editorial, whether it crumbled in fire or just slowly became a polite echo of itself, a version made safe, a version made boring. It wouldn't be the first time. Books today are still banned, still Baudelarized, still repackaged to fit acceptable narratives. Whole swaths of history reduced to trivia, great minds turned into calendar quotes, and always the temptation to tidy, to sanitize, to simplify. It's cleaner than fire, and more effective. You rise and look at the door. It's plain, modern, clearly added centuries later. Someone turned this room into a chapel once. There's a cross etched into the doorframe, faded with age. But you notice something strange. Beneath the cross, carved much more crudely, is a spiral. You've seen that spiral before. in the vault, in the catacombs, in the margins of scrolls. And now here, as if someone tried to hide the trail by weaving it through the replacement, like a whisper in the choir, like a rebel tucked behind a prayer. You open the door and step out into another corridor. This one feels different, not older, not newer, just off. The walls are painted in pale colors, no flames here, no erosion, just long, flat stretches of story, images of scholars, saints, prophets, and beneath each one, a quote, a teaching, a neat little message to take home. You stop at one. Only the righteous are meant to read the stars. Ah, there it is. The new version of knowledge, wrapped in obedience, dressed in virtue. And you realize the most frightening theory of all. Maybe the library didn't die. Maybe it was domesticated, trained to serve new masters, stripped of its teeth, taught to behave. And that version still lives today. Tidy, respectable, dull. But somewhere behind it, beneath it, within the cracks, something wilder waits. Not erased, just hiding. You keep walking. The quotes can't stop you now. You emerge from the corridor like stepping out of a dream, only to find yourself in another. Gone are the burn marks, the cracked marble, the silence of abandonment. This part of the library, or maybe the city around it, feels alive, not in the literal sense, not bustling with scholars and scrolls, but pulsing with something, a hum, a residue, like the walls remember more than they should. And what they remember most is survival. Because despite everything you've seen, everything burned or buried, there's one truth you can't shake. The library didn't really die. It mutated. You step into a gallery of arches, tall, graceful, untouched by fire. The walls are lined with recessed alcoves, each holding a statue, not of gods, of books, literal sculptures of scrolls, codices, tablets, some stone, some bronze, one even carved in translucent crystal. Each one bears a name, and none of them are Greek. Here's where it gets strange, in a thrilling, world-spanning kind of way. Because after the supposed death of the library, there's a curious explosion of intellectual centers all over the known world. Baghdad, Cordoba, Constantinople, Nalanda, Chang'an, Timbuktu. Each with its own library. Each with its own scholars. Each suddenly brilliant. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Alexandria didn't vanish. Maybe it migrated. One theory, shared quietly among researchers who love footnotes a little too much, suggests that the fall of Alexandria sparked an intellectual diaspora, that the surviving scribes, librarians, translators, and thinkers didn't die in the fire. They scattered. And they didn't just carry scrolls, they carried methods, ways of organizing thought, ways of questioning truth, ways of thinking, and they seeded those ideas wherever they landed. You pause beside a bronze statue of a scroll half unraveled, its surface engraved with both Arabic and Greek. Below it, a plaque. From ashes to ink again. Mainstream historians acknowledge that Islamic scholars in the 8th to 10th centuries preserved and expanded on many Greek texts. They didn't just translate, they challenged, improved, evolved. Algebra, optics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, it's all there. But here's what gets skipped in textbooks. Some of those texts had no known Greek originals. No Plato, no Pythagoras, no Archimedes. They appear suddenly in Baghdad, mature, precise, and anonymous. So where did they come from? One answer, lost Alexandrian works, copied, hidden, carried. Another? Entirely new creations, born in places Alexandria never imagined, but using her skeleton. Historians still argue whether the intellectual golden ages of the East were truly descendants of Alexandria, or whether they merely walked parallel paths, but the overlap is uncanny, too uncanny. And this is where it gets poetic. Because even if no scroll survived, no ash-dusted papyrus, no gold-lettered codex, the idea survived. The idea that knowledge is borderless, fluid, dangerous, and endlessly reborn. You step through a curtain of gauze, and the gallery opens into a star-shaped room. At each point of the star, a symbol, not letters, icons. A lotus, a crescent, a wheel, a book, a spiral, a sun. Each one representing a different civilization that, at some point, carried the flame Alexandria once held. And in the center, a pedestal, empty, waiting, as if to say the next library isn't built of stone. It's made of you, your mind, your curiosity, your questions. Because here's your fringe but plausible tidbit of the night. Some researchers believe that the true spirit of the Great Library lives on in the world's secret societies, not because they hold literal scrolls, but because they guard certain intellectual lineages, symbolic languages, geometries, philosophies, passed down through code, ritual, architecture. Not facts, frameworks. And if that's true, then the library didn't fall. It went underground. Think of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the Library of Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, the Library of Constantinople before the Crusaders got to it, the Nalanda Mahavihara in India, all built on a familiar blueprint, central hubs of information, multicultural collections, scholars debating, translating, preserving. Sound familiar? Of course it does. Because when an idea is powerful enough, it doesn't die. It evolves. You walk slowly through the star-shaped chamber. The light above is diffused, flickering, unsure of its source. Maybe moonlight, maybe something else. The walls seem to breathe slightly, like pages fluttering. And you realize, maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Not why was the library destroyed, but where did it go? Because maybe it's not just one place. Maybe it's 1,000. Maybe it never stopped moving. And maybe the real horror isn't the idea of its loss, but the possibility that it's still out there, and we're just not looking hard enough. You leave the star-shaped chamber slowly, half expecting it to vanish the moment your back is turned, but it doesn't. It stays, like a lighthouse glowing behind you, a reminder that the library wasn't just a building. It was a virus of wonder, and it's still infecting the world if you know where to look. But you're not done yet, because the trail of vanishing scrolls has one more twist, one final detour through power, politics, and the age-old game of who gets to know what and when. You follow a hallway downward again, spiral-shaped, like a corkscrew into the earth. It's too narrow for grandeur, too quiet for ceremony, and halfway down, the walls change. Not broken, not scorched, whitewashed, deliberate, sterile, erased. You run your hand along one, smooth as chalk, like someone scraped clean 1,000 years of thought. This is the part of the library that was not forgotten. It was silenced. Because when the library fell, or scattered, someone gained from its loss. And someone else lost everything. You're entering the realm of power now, the one subject ancient scrolls rarely addressed directly, because they didn't have to. Power doesn't need to be written to be understood. It just needs to be felt. And after Alexandria, it shifted. The world changed. A new order rose. Kings, bishops, emperors, caliphs, popes, bureaucrats, censors, each one inheriting a slightly smaller world and liking it that way. Because here's the hard truth. For all its faults, the Library of Alexandria represented a threat. Not just to religion, not just to superstition, to hierarchy. Imagine a city where anyone, philosopher, merchant, foreigner, child, could walk in and read a scroll that challenged a king's authority, disproved a miracle, or unveiled a method to build a catapult strong enough to breach palace walls. That's not a library. That's revolution. And revolutions don't always come with swords. Sometimes they come with syllables. Historians still argue whether Alexandria's fall coincided with a broader intellectual collapse, or was merely symbolic. But one thing's clear, in the centuries that followed, power centralized. Information was no longer shared, it was licensed. The printing press wouldn't arrive for another 1,000 years. Until then, control. Scriptoria were established in monasteries and temples, gateways of truth curated by gatekeepers. Dangerous knowledge was locked in vaults. Certain texts were placed on forbidden lists. The ones that made it through were edited, sanitized, translated conveniently. You walk into a small chamber, barely lit. Its only decoration is a single stone slab, etched in Latin. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who watches the watchers? It's a question that echoes through every age, because those who profit from knowledge being scarce are rarely eager to see it spread. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the 13th century, the Vatican established the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the list of prohibited books. It wasn't the first, it wasn't the last, but it was the most famous. For centuries, certain ideas, heliocentrism, anatomy, democracy, even fiction, were declared too dangerous to print. And what's even more interesting, many of those banned books trace their roots back to Alexandrian thinkers. Galen, Aristarchus, Euclid, Herophilos, Plotinus. It's almost like someone was still chasing Alexandria through the centuries, trying to shut it up. Even more chilling, there's a long-standing theory that some powers didn't just suppress knowledge, they hoarded it. That scrolls and relics from Alexandria were not lost to fire or decay, but smuggled into the hands of ruling classes, hidden in castles, transferred through secret orders, passed down like cursed treasure. Some say the Vatican holds Alexandrian manuscripts in its secret archives, a real place, by the way. Others claim the British Museum, the Russian State Library, or even the Library of Congress may hold unmarked fragments, ancient papers stored among the miscellaneous or misclassified. One persistent rumor from the 1700s says that a wooden crate arrived in Florence, marked with the sigil of the Serapeum, containing scrolls written in 2 unknown languages. The crate was never opened. Its last known location, lost, or purchased, quietly. Because here's the real nightmare, not that knowledge died, but that it was captured, tamed, monetized. You glance upward and notice that this chamber has no ceiling. It opens into darkness, like a well without bottom. You hear something far above, a chain, a bell, a whisper? Hard to tell, because you've reached the threshold of the theory that hurts the most. Someone knew. Someone read what was in the library, and they used it not to enlighten the world, but to rule it, not with scrolls, with secrets. You take a deep breath and begin to climb the spiral out. It's narrow, cramped, but you move faster now, heart thudding, because Alexandria may have been burned to dust, but its ashes still stain the hands of history, and some of those hands are very, very clean. Too clean. The staircase twists like a serpent. You emerge blinking into torchlight, soft, flickering, casting long shadows across what must have once been an atrium. The ceiling is gone now, open to stars and time. Above, constellations hang like questions that haven't been answered in centuries. You're in the timeline full of holes. This is where the trail gets slippery, not erased, not rewritten, just missing. Because here's the thing about the great library of Alexandria. Its story doesn't just end with fire, or scroll theft, or secret vaults. Its story is full of gaps, glitches, abrupt stops. You move past shattered columns toward a series of broken plinths. Once, they held statues. Now, each one is topped with a slab of blackened stone, dates etched in fading scripts. But they don't line up. One reads 48 BCE, another 272 CE, a third says 391 CE, a fourth 642. Too many endpoints, too many final fires. And that's where the unease begins to creep in. Because historians still argue, how could something this important be lost so many times, with so little agreement on when or how it finally fell? Most cultural landmarks get a clear obituary. The Parthenon was bombed, Pompeii was buried, Notre Dame caught fire, and we watched it in real time. But Alexandria? It disappears like a magician's coin. And every time you think you found the true cause of its destruction, another version steps in. You reach a small podium, charred black with a broken inscription. You brush the dust away. It reads, "To know what's missing, you must know what should be here." And that's the heart of the problem. Because we don't. We don't have an inventory, no catalog, no master scroll listing what was contained in the library. Every estimate, 40,000 scrolls, 400,000, a million, is guesswork, based on memory, hearsay, hope. That's not just mysterious. That's suspicious. You sit for a moment, cross-legged on a warm slab of limestone, and let your mind wander. Think of all the things the library might have recorded. Star charts now lost. Lore, medicines now repatented. Philosophies rebranded and sold. Goods and devices now being discovered again. And now imagine this. What if the timeline was never missing? What if it was edited? One theory suggests that the chaos surrounding Alexandria's destruction was deliberate, a form of chronological camouflage. Hide the truth in overlapping stories so no one ever knows where the real break occurred. Imagine a forger carefully burning only some parts of the ledger, not enough to destroy the illusion, just enough to fog it. A timeline full of holes is useful for the people who control what gets filled in. Here's your fringe but fun tidbit for tonight. A few modern researchers have noted uncanny technological descriptions in surviving ancient texts, things like signal mirrors, water clocks accurate to the second, oracles described in mechanical terms, and yet we're told these were metaphors. Maybe they were. Or maybe we've misread their place in time. There's a persistent theory, deeply unpopular in academic circles but obsessively followed by a certain stripe of independent scholar, that history has been compressed, that whole centuries may have been added or deleted. The phantom time hypothesis, they call it. Wild? Yes. Impossible? Not entirely. If someone had access to enough original scrolls, maps, records, court documents, they could reshape history itself, make emperors appear sooner or later, make technologies arrive just in time to justify power shifts. If true, the library wouldn't just be a building. It would be a time machine. And its destruction? A cover-up. You rise again and walk to the edge of the room. A doorway stands open to the outside world. Beyond it, sand, night wind, sea air. But beside the door, there's a small engraving. Faint, almost erased. A scroll unfurled. A torch beside it. And beneath, in Greek. All books are time travelers. Some go forward. Some go missing. You step through the door. Because maybe the scariest truth isn't that knowledge was stolen. It's that reality was rewritten, one scroll at a time, and we're still living in the edited version. You step out into the night, and immediately you realize this isn't outside, not really. You're in an open-air courtyard, the sky above ink black and splattered with stars, but the space itself is still enclosed. High stone walls rise like forgotten fortress teeth, ivy claws at the edges. Something creaks overhead, like a rope or a rusted pulley, long unused. This is the final fringe of the library, not its foundation, its shadow. The part that lives on in rumors, obsessions, and conspiracy boards lit by midnight lamps. The part that's no longer about history, but about what still hunts it. You walk slowly, the stone beneath your feet is warm, from the sun earlier, or maybe something else. And on the walls? Paintings. Not ancient frescoes, these are newer, added long after the fire, a kind of fan fiction of history. Someone, maybe many someones, couldn't let go of the library, so they came back, painted what they imagined, what they feared, and what they were still searching for. Because here's where the story goes full circle. The great library of Alexandria was never just a place. It became an obsession. You step past the first painting, a man in Renaissance robes holding a torch and a scroll. Behind him, a wall of flames. His face is turned away, toward a black tunnel. Beneath him, a single word, search. The next painting shows a group of robed figures in a stone room. Their hands are on a large open book. Eyes glowing gold, they stand in a circle. Around them, machines, gears, levers, symbols you don't recognize. Beneath, guard. And the third? A modern man, lab coat, headphones, a computer behind him. On his desk, a papyrus scroll and a USB drive. Beneath that? Reconstruct. You pause. Because this isn't just a dream anymore. This is a pattern. Here's what's real. Over the last 2 centuries, dozens of explorers, Researchers, mystics, and collectors have hunted the lost library. They haven't just searched the ruins of Alexandria. They've combed desert monasteries, private collections, and secret archives from Cairo to Calcutta. Some claim to have found scroll fragments. Others say they discovered codes hidden in known works, like clues left behind by desperate scribes trying to outwit the flames. A few claim entire books survived. None of them agree on what was in them. Some say mathematical formulas that predict solar flares to the year. Others whisper about dream manipulation. A few obsess over biological diagrams too precise for their time. One researcher, an amateur in Istanbul in 1937, claimed he found an Alexandrian scroll describing a lens that sees the soul. He published exactly one page before disappearing. His apartment was ransacked. His notes? Gone. You move to a small alcove in the courtyard. Inside is a bench, and above it, scrawled messily, not painted, is a series of names, all crossed out. Except one. Anonymous, Anonymous. You sit? Because that's who's left, isn't it? The anonymous few who won't let the library rest, who see its ashes not as death, but as breadcrumbs. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the early 2000s, a digital archive project in Europe accidentally uploaded a mislabeled papyrus fragment. It sat online for 2 years before someone realized it was a partial copy of a lost work by Heron of Alexandria. The file vanished the next day. No official explanation. But conspiracy forums lit up for weeks. And that's the thing. Alexandria isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a magnet. People are still looking, still building theories, still digging. Some believe the scrolls were stored in hidden catacombs beneath the Nile and will be found when water levels drop. Others say a portion of the library was smuggled to India and became part of early Hindu alchemical texts. Some even suggest the Dead Sea Scrolls are a kind of echo, not Alexandrian, but parallel, another survival effort. And then there are those who insist the real treasure was never the scrolls. It was the method. The way Alexandria trained people to think, to question, to connect dots others didn't even see. And that method? It leaked, escaped in whispers, got embedded in secret societies, in architectural blueprints, in the esoteric texts of the Enlightenment, in symbols carved into the walls of medieval cathedrals, the spiral, the torch, the triangle. All those quiet fingerprints. Because Alexandria didn't just haunt scholars. It infected the occult too. Mystics, alchemists, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, Gnostics, all of them claim some ancestral link to the library's flame. Whether it's real, who knows? But the fire still burns in their myths. You look back at the paintings, the man with the USB, the circle of glowing eyes, and you wonder, if someone rebuilt the library today, would we even notice? Or would it look like a research lab, a server farm, a hidden folder on the cloud? Maybe it already exists, not in one place, but spread across hard drives, forums, secret basements full of printouts and red string. Not a building, a network. And if that's true, then the library didn't just survive. It's watching us now. The courtyard fades behind you as you step through a low archway. One last corridor, narrow and tiled with faded mosaics underfoot. The patterns are broken, but you can still make them out. An owl, a flame, an open eye. They watch you pass like silent librarians, judging gently. You know what's coming. You've walked the ruins. You've felt the fire in your lungs and the mercury in your throat. You've seen scrolls vanish, names erased, truth rewritten. Now imagine it happens again. Right now. Because the scariest theory isn't that the great library was destroyed long ago. It's that we're building it again, and it could fall even faster. Imagine this, a modern library of Alexandria. Not scrolls and marble and sunlit colonnades, but satellites, servers, drives humming in temperature-controlled bunkers beneath Icelandic lava fields and Nevada dust. Every book scanned, every lecture transcribed, every thought ever tweeted, posted, saved to the cloud. A perfect digital repository of humanity's knowledge. And now imagine, one day, someone pulls the plug. Not a literal plug, maybe, but a virus, a hack, a policy change, a blackout, a court order, or just indifference. And the lights go out. Scrolls were lost in fire. But now, scrolls can vanish in one click. You step into a wide room, this one modernized. Electricity hums somewhere. There's a glass panel mounted on a rusted stand, flickering with static. It tries to boot up, fails, restarts. Behind it, an old terminal keyboard, missing several keys. This is a reconstruction room, or what's left of one. The future tried to rebuild the past here, and then it walked away. The screen flashes once, briefly, and you see an interface, a list of metadata entries, file names. Each line begins with Alex Volt Alpha 00X.tx, and they're all marked, corrupted. You stare at the screen until it powers down again, leaving only your reflection staring back at you, a ghost holding a torch someone else lit. Because here's the twist. We're doing it again. Right now. We digitize everything, archive everything, store everything. Google Books, the Internet Archive, libraries converting entire collections into bits and bytes. And in doing so, we forget what Alexandria tried to warn us. That knowledge isn't just about preservation. It's about access, about intent, about who controls the portal. A book hidden in a vault is just as lost as one in flames. And a book behind a paywall might as well be ash. Historians still argue whether the modern world has truly learned anything from Alexandria's fall. We have better tech, sure, but we also have shorter attention spans, server outages, algorithmic biases, data loss, political manipulation. We trust that the cloud is permanent, but clouds vanish, and hard drives melt, and knowledge, once again, can be erased not by destruction, but by inconvenience. You walk past a wall of shattered glass cabinets. A plaque dangles from a single screw, half lit by dying light. The words are etched in English this time. We imagined we were saving everything, but we were only saving copies, and no one remembered the passwords. You sit on a cracked plastic bench and stare into the dark. What if the digital library of Alexandria already exists? What if it's scattered across servers, flash drives, decrypted torrents, mirrored backups? What if the complete map of human understanding is sitting in front of us, but we've lost the keys? Or worse, what if we're letting it rot behind subscriptions and CAPTCHA puzzles and expired formats? Think about it. If Alexandria fell today, would it be a fire? Or just a shrug? Would we mourn? Or just click refresh? Here's your fringe, but not really tidbit. In 2021, the Internet Archive went to court over its practice of controlled digital lending, a legal battle over whether scanning and lending books digitally counts as fair use. The outcome? Still contested. But the message was clear. Knowledge is a business, and businesses can be bought or shut down. And suddenly, you realize, maybe we're not afraid of another library being destroyed. Maybe we're afraid of realizing we already let it happen. Not with fire, but with apathy. You rise slowly. One last door stands ahead. A keypad, rusted, dead. It doesn't matter. You've already passed through the real threshold. Because this wasn't just a tour through the ruins of an ancient library. It was a tour through the pattern. And the pattern is repeating. The door swings open. It shouldn't. The keypad was dead, the hinge is rusted, but it opens anyway, smooth and silent, like it was waiting for you. On the other side, a round room. No flames, no shattered stone, no ash. This room is clean. Too clean. The walls are polished marble, white and seamless. No shelves, no statues, no scrolls. Just a circular table in the center, ringed with empty chairs, 12 of them. Each one a different design. Greek, Egyptian, Roman, Persian, Indian, Chinese, Islamic, Renaissance, Victorian, Modernist, Futurist, and one made entirely of mirrored glass. A place set for every era. But no one sits, because this is a symbol, a space not meant to be filled by bodies but by ideas. The ghost of the great library, reconstructed not in form, but in meaning. You walk slowly toward the table, etched into the center a spiral. Of course! And around the spiral, a single sentence carved in a dozen languages. You feared what it made you think. And that's it, isn't it? That's the fear behind the flames, behind the thefts, the edits, the denials. Alexandria didn't burn because it failed. It burned because it worked. Because it woke people up. The scrolls it held, some were revolutionary, but the real danger was what they did to the people who read them. They made minds sharper, broader, braver. And nothing frightens empire, dogma, or tyranny more than a truly free mind. That's why they erased it. Because it offered a world without them. Historians still argue whether the library's most controversial scrolls were real or imagined, whether it truly held secrets of the stars, of medicine, of machines. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the truth is simpler and more frightening. Maybe it held hope. Not mythic, not magical, just structured, recorded proof that humanity was capable of so much more than obedience. And that can't be burned. Because once someone knows that the world can be different, that they themselves can change, they can't unknow it. And that's what Alexandria unleashed. Not light, but hunger. To learn, to question, to build. You run your fingers across the mirrored chair. It reflects you back, distorted slightly, elongated by the curve. Not as you are, but as you might be. That's what the library always offered, wasn't it? A mirror. Not of what the world was, but of what it could be. Here's your final fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the true purpose of the library was not to preserve knowledge, but to change it, to evolve it. That's why they copied everything, edited everything, argued everything. Because ideas are not holy relics, they are living things, and sometimes they have to be broken to be remade. That's what frightened everyone, not the scrolls, the transformation they caused. And maybe that's what it's still causing. Because the pattern never ends. Alexandria rises and falls over and over, on islands of stone, on paper, on silicon. The real library? It was never a place. It was a question. And questions don't burn. They survive. In caves, in memories, in margins. And now, in you. You turn to leave the room, but the spiral draws your eye one last time. You notice something you hadn't before. A second spiral, smaller, intertwined. And between them, a dot. Like an eye. Like a seed. Like a beginning. Because the final, most frightening theory is also the most beautiful. That the library wasn't destroyed at all. It simply planted itself. And it's still growing. In dreams. In obsessions. In dark corners of the internet. In whispered rebellions. In every person who asks not, what did they tell me? But what did they leave out? And those people? They're building it again. Right now. Not with scrolls, but with will. The spiral fades. The door closes softly behind you. And you find yourself walking through quiet again. Not marble, not shadow, not fire, but something slower, softer. The air has changed. The night has settled into its gentlest form. Even your footsteps now seem reluctant, cushioned by dust and time. You've reached the end of the trail. The torches are behind you. The theories, the chaos, the silence, all of it now part of a long story that may never fully end, because maybe that's the point. Maybe some stories aren't meant to be resolved. Maybe they're meant to echo. Softly. Forever. The stars above have shifted position slightly, as if they've watched everything with patient eyes. The sky holds no judgment, only memory, and beneath it, the earth is still. The kind of stillness that only comes after centuries of voices finally quiet. You walk slowly past the ruined columns, past the scorched benches, past the echo of debates long buried beneath silt and silence. Somewhere a breeze stirs. A few leaves rustle, dry and curled at the edges like forgotten pages. There are no flames here now. No scrolls. Just space. Space to imagine. To wonder. To rest. Because whether the Library of Alexandria was burned, buried, rewritten, or reborn, Its spirit survives in the most improbable place of all, within you, not as facts, not as records, but as questions, as patterns, as a slow, burning desire to know more, to understand the shape behind the smoke, to follow the spiral one curve deeper. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the library never wanted to be eternal. Maybe it only wanted to be remembered long enough for someone else to try again. Someone like you. So tonight, as your breath slows and your mind wanders gently toward the edge of sleep, hold on to this. The greatest knowledge wasn't what was stored on the shelves. It was what it awakened in the people who walked between them. Curiosity, defiance, hope, the willingness to ask, what else, what if, why not? And that spark is still alive. You carry it now, quietly, unfolding, one breath at a time. So close your eyes. Let the scrolls fade. Let the fire burn out. Let the library rest, for now. It knows you're listening. And that's enough?